Authorised entry to football matches bill, second reading.
Mr. Brennan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yes, it's me again, but I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Earlier on I was playing up front, but I'm back here at the back now for this part, and I hope to be back on the front bench later on today if my bill makes the progress that I hope it will do after our second reading debate. Now, on Sunday the 11th of July 2021, the final of the men's Euros football tournament at Wembley could have resulted in not just the sad loss for the English football team in the final, but in a tragic loss of life. That was the finding of the independent review that was conducted by Baroness Louise Casey into the events of that day, suggesting that we narrowly escaped a disaster that could have resulted in fatalities or irreversible injuries. And of course, for everyone here, the mere thought that such a catastrophe is still possible in this country at a football match in the 21st century, after the tragedies of the latter part of the last century, is a profoundly unsettling thought. I know that there were some members of this House who were present at the Euro 2020 final. It took place in 2021, but it was still the Euro 2020 final, and witnessed firsthand the reckless behaviour of some people seeking to enter the stadium without a ticket for the final. But I do have to admit, I was genuinely shocked to discover when the House of Commons Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, of which I was a member at the time, undertook an inquiry following the Euros that entering or attempting to enter a football match without a ticket was not a specific criminal offence. And that's why the need for my bill was supported by that committee in a recommendation contained within its report on safety at major sporting events, which was published in December of last year. And I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that demonstrates the broad level of cross-party support there is in recognition of this problem and the consensus on the need for legislative action to put it right. And indeed, all of the members of that select committee, if honourable members want to take a glance at the bill, all of the members of that select committee at the time, with seats within the territorial scope of my bill, which incidentally is Wales and England, are the named co-sponsors on the face of the bill. So this has the full support of the select committee. Now, my measure brings into law recommendations that came out of the select committee's findings, but also of the Baroness Casey review, amending the Football Offences Act 1991 by introducing a new offence for unauthorised or attempted unauthorised entry to football matches. It's actually estimated that at the Euro 2020 final, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 people, ticketless individuals, were able to gain entry. And many people will have seen the disorder that was caused, the overcrowding, and the safety hazards that resulted from those events. And these are actions that not only compromise the safety and security of stewards, police officers, of spectators, of players and officials, but they also greatly tarnish the reputation of the sport and of this country. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Giving way. I mean, the thing that really surprised me is this wasn't just your average stadium. This is a stadium, purpose-built with which you would expect would have the best security, and yet those numbers of people were still able to get through and cause potential, as the honourable member said, potential loss of life.
Well, I think my honourable friend's absolutely right. I think we were all shocked to think that this was a relatively new flagship national stadium and that these events were able to take place there. And it does actually, call into question some thinking about the way that these stadiums are designed. And Wembley obviously has a particular feature of a long Wembley Way, which goes back to when the stadium was originally opened, I think in 1923 probably originally, and traditionally lots of fans approach in that direction in very large numbers. One thing that my bill does, though, that might assist the concerns of my honourable friend is that it makes it possible for the offence to be enforced not just at the turnstile, but around the premises on private land, so that an outer security cordon can also effectively enforce the offence that is being created by my bill. So that should certainly help in a place like Wembley, whereas my honourable friend says, it was quite shocking to see the numbers of people that were able to get past stewards and then to rush entry into the ground. I'll give way to the honourable member.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I support his bill. I think he's right to bring this forward. But in the spirit of scrutinising legislation, just on that particular point that he made, he's using what happened at the Euros as a justifiable reason for his bill, and I go along with that. But by increasing the scope of it to include different areas, which in the explanatory notes it seems include bars and car parks, it seems to me that he's making the same offence if somebody tries to blag their way into a car park as if they're trying to tailgate their way into the Euro semi-final. Does he really think that those two should be treated in the same way?
Well, I welcome the intervention from the honourable gentleman, who's also always very assiduous in his scrutiny of legislation, and quite rightly so. In isolation, no, it doesn't create this offence for somebody who's trying to get into a car park. It just reflects the reality of the areas around football grounds. If you take the Cardiff City Stadium, which is located, as I'll refer to later on, in my own constituency, it was built a few years ago, replacing the old Ninian Park Stadium across the road. And like a lot of newer stadiums, it's in a slightly more out-of-town location, surrounded by car parks that are there specifically to serve people who want to attend the match. Now, in some instances, in order to be effectively be able to enforce the intention of the creation of this new offence, it might be necessary to set up an outer cordon that is immediately outside the premises of the stadium itself. And that's the purpose of that provision within the bill. It's certainly, and indeed within those areas there may be other hospitality settings within those sorts of areas close to the stadium, but outside the turnstiles themselves. And in that instance, if another security cordon needed to be set up, it would mean my bill could be enforced in that instance, thus preventing people who came not with the intention and with a ticket of attending the match, but simply coming along in order to try and, to use the slang term, jib their way in to the ground. They could be prevented from doing so. But I do welcome the intervention from the honourable gentleman. Now, the current legal framework, actually I should go on to say, not only compromises the safety of the individuals I mentioned and tarnishes the reputation of the country potentially, but the Euros are returning here in 2028, and we can't afford there to be a replay of these events. The current legal framework doesn't really address the problem. Those caught having entered without authorisation face no legal repercussions, and those attempting to enter are simply moved on, and they often try on multiple times to try and gain entry. There's no consequences for those selfish actions, and they risk jeopardising the matches, and they could recklessly endanger the safety of lives and lives of others. So this bill is intended as a direct response to these challenges. By making unauthorised entry to football matches a specific offence, the aim is to deter individuals from attempting to enter stadiums without a valid ticket. And just before this morning's debate, Mr Deputy Speaker, I did an interview with, amongst others, Martin Keown, the former Arsenal footballer, on Talk Sport. And I think that was a feeling in that discussion that the deterrence effect of this measure is a significant part of it. Because if you are subject to a fine of up to £1,000, that might be a deterrent. But an even greater deterrent, in my view, that's part of this bill, is that conviction of this offence could lead to a court-imposed football banning order under the Football Spectators Act 1989 and Football open brackets offences close brackets Act 1991, preventing individuals from attending football matches for a specified period between 3 and 10 years. And this bill seeks to address all forms of unauthorised entry, recognising the broad spectrum of tactics employed to gain access to stadiums illicitly. I'll give way again to the honourable gentleman.
Of course, it begs the question as to why this only is designed to apply to football, because it seems to me that the same thing could apply to the Rugby World Cup final at Twickenham, or any other big sport, the Olympics when we had that, and may have it again in the future. Is the honourable gentleman saying that this is a problem unique to football, or is there any other reason why this bill and the provisions in the bill shouldn't apply to any major sporting events which may in the future have the same problem?
Of course, that's an extremely valid point that the honourable gentleman raises, and I've spoken with the Football Supporters Association in relation to this bill, and they generally have a concern about any legislation that singles out football, if you like, in this way. The reality is that in the legislative framework we have in this country, there is already in existence quite a significant suite of legislation that applies particularly to football, that was born out of some of the events I referred to earlier on, of the incidents that took place in the latter part of the last century. We've moved on hugely from that. I think we all thought we'd moved permanently on from the sorts of scenes, though, that were witnessed at the Euros final. But I absolutely accept the fact that there is a case to be made, because there have been problems in other types of events in recent years, for a wider look at this whole issue of gaining illicit entry into venues, whether it's for a music concert, a festival, whether it's for another type of sporting event. And I think that's something that the government and the opposition, Her Majesty's opposition, if it is indeed to become the next government shortly, that they should actually look further into the best way in order to achieve that outcome. In the relatively narrow confines of my private member's bill, with the opportunity to be able to amend legislation that's already on the statute book, and with the imminence of some very significant future events in football coming along, I think it's justified in this instance to bring forward a measure that particularly applies to football. But the broader point that the honourable gentleman makes is absolutely valid. Now, the scope of this bill extends across the top tiers of domestic football. So we're not talking about the local park match, Mr Deputy Speaker. So that would include, in England and Wales, the top tiers. That's the Premier League, the Championship, Leagues 1 and 2, the National League, the Women's Super League and Championship, and the Cymru Premier competition, as well as international matches in England and Wales. I will give way to my honourable friend.
My honourable friend, forgive me, where he's making an excellent speech, and I'm so glad he's able to clarify that the top tiers will be included, because although we hear about the super leagues and all the rest of it, places like my own Newport County, my beloved Newport County, are very important too, and although they may not be the very, very top tier, they're obviously as good as that, but they're in a slightly lower tier. But it's just important that we have clarification that they will be included too, because it's important to them.
Well, she's absolutely right. Somebody chuckled when she said they're as good as the top tier. I think the fright they gave to Manchester United recently in their FA Cup tie absolutely confirms the veracity of my honourable friend's judgment about Newport County. And I do remember, as a young man who grew up only 5 miles up the road from the old Somerton Park — they play in a different ground now — often sneaking away without telling my mother on the 123 bus to go and watch Newport County play, always at 3:15, Mr Deputy Speaker, on a Saturday afternoon, because of the proximity to the Llanwern steelworks, to allow the steelworkers finishing their shift to be able to attend the match, which is why on what's now called when the results were led out, you may remember, those of us who are old enough, that Newport County's home games were always late kick-off rather than being announced at 4:45 in the usual way. So, yes, she's absolutely right, and it would apply to Newport County, and it would apply to right down as far as the National League in the men's game in England and the other leagues I mentioned. And in fact, the Cardiff City Stadium, which I've already said is in my constituency, hosts the home games not just of Cardiff City, but of the Welsh national teams. And it would be remiss of me during the course of my speech not to mention the impeccable behaviour of Welsh fans attending matches there, and the cracking atmosphere that they create with passionate renditions of songs like Henrad van Hadau and Yma o Hyd. The vast majority of football fans across the country supporting clubs like my team, Cardiff City, or any other teams, do so in the right spirit. And it's important they can feel safe and secure, though, in supporting their football team. So I want to make it clear the intention of this bill is to support real football fans and to keep them safe and secure whilst they're enjoying the spectacle of supporting their team. Now, football is a big part of our national culture. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as honourable members know, I represent a Welsh constituency. I was born and brought up in Wales, and we're often associated with rugby, and I hope after today's debate to hop over to Dublin for the Wales-Ireland rugby match in the Six Nations on the weekend. But in fact, in recent years, football has grown ever more important in the national culture of Wales, and it's always been of huge importance across the rest of the UK, and bringing together individuals from all walks of life in shared support of their teams. So the actions of a few shouldn't be allowed to compromise the safety and security of the measure. Now, in drafting this bill, and I thank government civil servants for their help in doing so, I've been mindful of the balance between enhancing security and maintaining the open and inclusive nature of football matches. It's not the intention to criminalise fans or to create barriers to genuine supporters enjoying the game. Instead, the focus is on preventing those who would seek to cause disorder and harm from entering stadiums and thus ensuring a safer environment for all. And by strengthening the legal framework, we can deter unauthorised entry, we can reduce that risk of disorder and violence, and we can ensure that football continues to be a source of joy and community for everyone. So I urge the House to allow my second bill its second reading today. But before I go on to finish, I'm going to give way to the honourable gentleman who's just successfully got his bill through a second reading, and I'm sure we'll want to reciprocate on this one.
I'm highly supportive of this bill, and I congratulate him on bringing it to the House. Back in 2011, I had another successful private member's bill, the Sports Ground Safety Authority Bill. And I think the honourable member's bill runs in that fine tradition of improving safety at our sports grounds and for sports fans themselves and people around. If I heard the territorial extent of the bill, I think it didn't include some of our devolved authorities at Scotland, perhaps, and Northern Ireland as well. If he is successful, as I hope he is with this bill, will he and perhaps the Minister as well share their learnings on this with the Northern... We're all delighted that we have a Northern Ireland devolved assembly now. Will they share that with their colleagues in Scotland and in Northern Ireland? Because if they are going to host, particularly if they're going to host Euros or World Cups in the future, they would want this sort of excellent measure in place, like England and Wales will have.
Yes, and I congratulate him on getting his bill through its second reading, and for the second time, that's quite an achievement, and hopefully he'll get it through all the rest of the stages before the general election. And I don't normally necessarily approve of Lords, but on this occasion he's an elected Lord, and therefore I do approve of the fact he's got his bill through. And he's absolutely right that this bill applies territorially to England and Wales, because that's the scope of the current legislation that I'm seeking to amend through this particular bill. And Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own laws in relation to safety at football matches and so on, and I certainly would encourage them to take a look at my measure. I'm a big believer in devolution, so I wouldn't tell them what to do, but I think it would be they might find some useful ideas from taking a look at this measure, and he's right to point that out to the House. So I think it's possible that we can come together today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, from all sides of the House and send a strong message that such behaviour won't be tolerated, and that the safety and security of people attending and working at football matches are of absolute importance. And my bill reflects our collective responsibility to address the challenges facing the sport and to ensure that football remains a positive and uniting force in our society. And I do thank the English Football Association, the Football Association of Wales, for their support in drafting this bill, and to the members of the DCMS Select Committee, and as I said, the civil servants and officials, clerks and so on, for the support for the bill, and also to Mary in the members' tea room, who I discussed my bill with this morning, and given it her full support, showing that it passes the common sense test, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I commend it to the House.